Born on December 6, 1956 in Burbank, California, Randy Rhoads was the youngest kid in his family. His mom, Dolores, or Dee for short, started the Musonia Music School with Randy's dad, William Arthur Rhoads. Music was always in the family. Their dad played the clarinet and saxophone in the military, their grandma played piano, and their grandpa was a doctor who strummed a 1918 Gibson guitar. At 6 years old, Randy tried playing his grandpa's old guitar without even knowing how to hold it properly. He would lay it on the floor to play. Dee noticed how good he was getting and made sure that Randy and Kathy started guitar lessons at the family's music school. Randy Rhoads didn't have the easiest start at home. His parents split up when he was just 2 years old. Their mom, Dee, was a ruthless disciplinarian. One wrong move and she would spank them with a strap or whatever she could find. Once, when Dee told 12-year-old Randy that he had a talent for music, he actually cried because she hardly ever was one to give compliments. Their life wasn't just about music. They were also a part of the First Lutheran Church and School, where Dee led the choir. Randy was quite into his faith. He didn't go to church all the time, but he always wore a cross and took his beliefs very seriously. The Rhoads family was one of the first in the area to actually have a color TV, but they didn't have a record player until Randy got one with green stamps at the age of 15. In 1971, Kelly brought Randy to an Alice Cooper concert, and that had a huge impact on him. Like a lot of young guitar players in the 70s, Randy looked up to Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, and Leslie West. But it was actually glam rock that really got him going. He loved the showy style of Alice Cooper's guitar player Glenn Buxton. He was also really following Bebop Deluxe's Bill Nelson, and most of all, he idolized David Bowie's guitar player Mick Ronson. Randy watched Ronson at a Bowie concert in Santa Monica in October 1972 and was completely blown away. At that point, Randy got himself a Les Paul and a haircut similar to Mick Ronson's. Randy Rhoads didn't just copy Mick Ronson's hairstyle, he went all out with the glam look. He and his best buddy from Burbank High School, Kelly Garney, would spend weekends hunting for old clothes at thrift shops. Dressed in his glam gear, Randy stood out, which wasn't always great for a shy kid in high school. Kelly Garney met Randy when he was 12 and Randy was 13. Taking a cue from Randy, Kelly picked up the bass guitar because it had fewer strings. When Randy was ready to start a band, Kelly was the obvious choice for the bass. Kelly remembers how they'd sneak eggs under pillows and hide smelly pieces of meat under beds. If they spotted a cool belt or necklace they liked, they'd just go ahead and swipe it. But he said they never really grabbed anything valuable. Sometimes they'd spill gas on the street near Randy's place and lit it on fire when a car came by. Occasionally the cops were called during this time. They played in a high school band with Randy's brother Kelly on drums, calling it Violet Fox after their mom Dee's middle name. But it was in 1973 with their band Little Women that things started getting serious. After an all-nighter with a friend named Hillary, she mentioned a singer who had this Rod Stewart vibe going on. That's how they got to know Kevin Dubrow, an 18-year-old fan of British culture from Van Nuys, California. Dubrow wasn't just a singer of moderate skills. He was also great at getting things done for the band. He called himself the motivator, finding managers and handling business, especially since the rest of them were fresh out of high school and a bit disorganized. They brought in Drew Forsyth, a jazz drummer from Burbank High School, and soon Little Women became Quiet Riot. The name change happened after Dubrow met Rick Parfitt from Status Quo, who suggested the name Quite Right for a band. Dubrow misheard it due to his accent, thinking that he had said Quiet Riot, a name that sounded British enough to catch Randy's interest. They managed to get a record deal in Japan, releasing two average albums, Quiet Riot in 1977 and Quiet Riot 2 in 1978. They played regular gigs at seedy LA clubs like the Starwood, performing 4 nights a week, often doing multiple sets each night, but they really weren't earning that much money during that period. Randy, who was still living at his mom's place on Amherst Drive, started giving guitar lessons on the days that he wasn't playing with the band. Kelly Rhoads thinks it was Kevin Dubrow's fault that Quiet Riot didn't get signed back in the day. He says everybody blamed Kevin. They didn't like Kevin's singing, his stage presence, or his personality. Kelly remembers being with Randy and people would just come up to them and say, "Your band's really cool, but when you're going to get rid of the singer?" Kelly Garney admits that he never understood why Randy liked Kevin so much. He used to ask Randy, "Why do you like that jerk?" And Randy would just say that they totally got along fine. Quiet Riot, led by Kevin Dubrow, eventually hit it big with their 1983 album Mental Health. However, during the mid-70s, Randy's guitar skills got more attention than the singer's by any means. fellow guitar player, Greg Leon, who was in a band called Sweet 19 with Tommy Lee before he was in Motley Crue, met Randy at a gig where Quiet Riot and Van Halen were playing in 1976. Leon thought he was the best guitar player around until he met Randy. Randy had a special vibe, and that's when Van Halen came on stage, and Leon felt everything changed for him. The LA club scene was buzzing about these new guitar powerhouses, Randy and Eddie Van Halen. Randy did not like being compared to Eddie. He felt like it was always a competition between them. Despite this, Randy actually respected Eddie's playing. Greg Leon and Randy Rhoads got to be such good pals that when Randy decided to leave Quiet Riot, he suggested Leon should be the one to take his place. And Leon was so thankful that he actually returned the favor. He helped Randy come up with what turned out to be one of the most famous guitar riffs of all time, with Ozzy, the one from Crazy Train. Greg Leon recalls him hanging out and showing Randy the riff from Steve Miller's Swing Town. They played around with it, and before he knew it, Randy transformed it into the iconic Crazy Train riff. Back in 1978, Dana Strum played bass for a band called Bad Axe and was a regular on the Sunset Strip club scene. He'd been watching Quiet Riot do their thing for some months. Dana Strum would specifically go to the Starwood to watch Randy play. He was blown away by Randy's talent. It wasn't just good or bad, it was actually something special. Randy was a well-known figure on the Sunset Strip by then, and he was used to getting praise from young musicians who were out there trying to make it. The Strum could not hold back from telling Randy just how talented he thought he was, and Randy at the time seemed surprised, taking the compliment with humility. Half a year after that conversation, Strum chanced upon an opportunity that might be the break that Randy needed. Ozzy Osbourne, having recently been kicked out of Black Sabbath in 1979, was languishing at the Le Parc Hotel in West Hollywood. And at that point, Ozzy's life was an endless cycle of drug deliveries and pizza. Even though Ozzy was still under contract with Jet Records, the label didn't really make any effort to actually encourage him to get on with a solo career. Still, Ozzy made some half-hearted attempts. And it was during one of these attempts that he happened to see Dana Strum playing at the Starwood one summer night in 1979. Ozzy, being in a foggy state, ended up inviting Strum to try out for his band. The Dana Strum, a devoted Black Sabbath fan, was totally thrilled to meet Ozzy, even though at this time, Sabbath wasn't universally revered. The audition was at Frank Zappa's rehearsal space on Sunset with Gary Moore present. Not knowing who Gary Moore was, but struck by his talent, Strum nonetheless told Ozzy that Moore's bluesy sound just was not right for him. Strum, young and impassioned about music, boldly told Ozzy that he knew the perfect guitar player for him. The following day, Dana Strum found himself driving Ozzy around LA to audition guitar players, with Ozzy holding a list of names and addresses. Strum kept insisting that they should just drop the search because he already knew the right guitar player. When Strum called Randy about the opportunity, Randy immediately expressed his dislike for Black Sabbath, and this completely threw Dana Strum for a loop, because he had never considered that kind of reaction. Despite the hesitation, Randy asked Dana to front him some gas money, and at that point, Randy went ahead and headed into the audition. Despite Randy's indifference, Strum managed to convince him to meet Ozzy at the same night at Dalton Records, where Strum worked part-time. By the time they were ready, Ozzy was completely obliterated. Ozzy started teasing Strum about the upcoming audition, jokingly calling Randy the Jesus of guitar players. At this point, Strum was starting to regret his decision, with Ozzy wanting to leave and Randy not being a Black Sabbath fan. Dana Strum turned the lights down low in the control room, hoping Ozzy would concentrate on the music alone. Randy, barely visible on the other side of the glass, was instructed to play his Starwood guitar solo. Ozzy had passed out by this point, and Strum had to help the singer into the control room. When Randy started his solo, it sounded massive and incredibly loud. In less than a minute, an astonished Ozzy stumbled over to Dana and instructed him to give Randy the gig right then and there and take him home. Too shy to cut Randy's playing short, Strum left to take Ozzy back to his hotel while Randy just continued to play. When Strum returned, he broke the news to Randy, who was curious about what came next. The next day, there was a brief encounter at Ozzy's hotel, during which Randy didn't make the best impression, sipping Diet Coke and dressing flamboyantly. After their initial encounter, Randy and the others, including drummer Frankie Banali, who Randy recommended, jammed together at Pasha Music Studios. At this point in Ozzy's career, his business was being managed by Don Arden, the head of Jet Records, who was a real tough figure in the music industry. Arden had ordered Ozzy back to England, where his wife Thelma lived, and where there wouldn't be any costly hotel bills for Arden to worry about. In England, Ozzy met Bob Daisley, an Australian bassist with a history in blues rock and a knack for lyrics, which complemented Randy's musical abilities. Daisley had played with Chicken Shack and Widowmaker and had just left Rainbow when David Arden, Don's son, the manager of Jet's London office, approached him to collaborate with Ozzy. They wanted to form a new UK-based band, but finding a guitarist proved difficult. Ozzy mentioned this guitar player that he had met in LA. David Arden was hesitant, but eventually agreed to fly Randy over from LA. Randy himself was unsure about taking this step. He was hesitant to leave his teaching job at their mother's school, which he loved. But their mom saw this as Randy's big break. Randy was resistant, even lacking a jacket for the trip, but his mom insisted, ready to buy one if needed. Randy Rhoads arrived in London in September of 1979 and found himself feeling incredibly homesick. He reached out to his family daily, voicing his discomfort through phone calls and writing postcards and letters. His sister said that none of them really left home before. Being tossed into the world like that, especially with somebody like Ozzy, was probably pretty tough for him. When he met Randy, Bob Daisley was completely taken back by the way he looked, with his well-groomed nails, styled hair, and sharp clothes. Nevertheless, the two hit it off musically right away. Randy would bring the chords, and together they'd shape them into songs. They would play together, and Ozzy would improvise over the top with some vocal melodies, and then Bob would later write lyrics and bring them back. The project they were working on wasn't intended to be a solo record for Ozzy, but rather the first album of a new band called Blizzard of Oz, a fact echoed by ex-Uriah Heep drummer Lee Kerslake when he joined in December of 1979, something that Randy was pretty keen on. This sentiment was underlined when Randy asked Ozzy if he could record a classical guitar piece called D after his mom, to which Ozzy responded, "Hey, it's your album too." In interviews at the time, Randy expressed a collaborative spirit, saying, "Ozzy's music is ours together. Sometimes he has a melody, and I just happen to have the right riff, or I'll be noodling on the guitar, and he'll like something and tell me to hang on to it. We usually end up working on it immediately and build a song right from there." However, the notion that they were forming a new band was short-lived. The first signs of this were evident when they made their first album, and when the tour jackets came out with Ozzy Osbourne prominently featured, it was abundantly clear. While the album retained the name Blizzard of Oz, it was marketed as Ozzy's solo debut, regardless of how the members originally envisioned the group. At Ridge Farm, a residential recording studio in Surrey, they created a 9-track marvel under the guidance of novice producer Max Norman. This record would stand as one of Ozzy's finest records. From the energetic kickoff, I Don't Know, to the powerful Crazy Train, to the eerie Mr. Crowley, these would all become staples of Ozzy's live performances for the following 3 decades. When the album hit the UK charts in September of 1980 and made it to the top 10, it helped to overshadow the private doubts that Randy still harbored as he set off on his first UK tour with Ozzy. Reflecting on his experiences before joining Ozzy, Randy admitted, "I used to feel really self-conscious on stage. Any issue with my amps or sounds would totally throw me off. But working with Ozzy boosted my self-esteem immensely. He encouraged Randy to take risks and try things that he never would have dared try by himself." However, the tour's set list was limited since they only had 1 album's worth of material. So each night's performance ended with 3 definitive Black Sabbath hits: Iron Man, Children of the Grave, and Paranoid. Randy had a strong aversion to playing those particular songs. Randy didn't see the point in continuing to perform these Black Sabbath tunes. He was hopeful that their next album, they could move along beyond relying on Ozzy's previous fame. When Sharon Arden, Don Arden's driven daughter who had taken charge of managing Ozzy's career at Jet, hurried them back into Ridge Farm to lay down a second album before the debut tour in the US, Randy thought it might be able to expand their repertoire more. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Upon first receiving his first significant royalty payment, Randy's immediate purchase was a custom-made acoustic guitar from Spain worth $5,000, which was a substantial amount back then. In 1981, reflecting on his success, Randy remarked, "I haven't fully grasped it yet. My past is still with me and I'm trying to grow into this new reality, but I'm not grounded. I don't even know myself or what I've become. Some folks think success will turn you arrogant. That's nonsense. It actually leaves you feeling scared and modest." Coming back to Ridge Farm in early '81, unlike their earlier session, the band had hardly any fresh material. They ended up crafting some songs from bits of Bob Daisley's former bands. A bass line from a track named Black Sally that Bob wrote for Mecca was reworked into Little Dolls. Another bass riff from Bob's time with Kava's Jute was repurposed into You Can't Kill Rock and Roll. Randy also revisited his glam rock days with Quiet Riot, using the burning riff for Flying High again. Randy, a musician who valued quality and was unaccustomed to rushing his work to meet a record label's schedule, was dissatisfied with the hurried production of the new album. He later admitted to feeling uneasy about some of the tracks, saying, "We're so pressured for time in the studio because we had to head to America for another tour." Despite his reservations, the album, called Diary of a Madman, definitely had its standouts, especially the formidable and eerily powerful title song. However, Randy was not pleased with the controversy that was about to explode in the US after it became public that Ozzy had bitten off the heads of 2 live doves during a meeting with a record company in Los Angeles. That did change a bit when the resulting scandal and outrage actually helped send the Blizzard of Oz album climbing up the American charts. This marked the start of Ozzy's transformation into the archetype of the untamed rock star. Over the next year, fans began bringing all sorts of macabre offerings to his shows. While the scandal provided much-needed momentum for album sales in the US, where initial sales had been disappointing to the point where Randy feared maybe new wave and punk has just totally done our music in, he was embarrassed by the way it overshadowed the music that they were actually creating. Randy was disturbed by the outrageous fan behavior, including an incident where someone presented Ozzy with a dead goat. Not long before the US tour, Bob Daisley and Lee Kerslake were let go due to what Ozzy described as their complaints and gripes about finances. It turned out that Randy was actually the only one who made the effort to call them to express his good wishes. However, he was also quick to suggest potential replacements to Sharon, his former Quiet Riot bandmates Frankie Banali and bassist Rudy Sarzo. Yet Sharon actually had other plans. She picked Tommy Aldridge, veteran of Pat Travers and Black Oak, Arkansas, to play drums. The bass position remained open, however, and Rudy Sarzo, with Quiet Riot on hiatus, was promptly offered the spot, and he accepted without hesitation. Dana Strum, the person who had originally connected Ozzy and Randy, denies feeling sidelined by Sarzo's recruitment. He suggests that either his name was bypassed or perhaps Randy just favored Sarzo's style of playing. With the second Ozzy Osbourne album ready, but held until November of 1981, the band spent the remainder of the year touring intensively. On stage, Ozzy and Randy were quite the act, with Ozzy playfully engaging with Randy in ways that he never would have with the more serious Tony Iommi, tugging at Randy's hair, bumping into him, and laughing heartedly as Randy unleashed his guitar solos.
I'd like to present you with the 1981 Best New Talent Award. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Rudy Sarzo recalls the first tour as a total blast. During the recording of Diary of a Madman, Ozzy's then-wife Thelma had visited, which left Sharon, who was having an affair with Ozzy, without a place to stay. Randy had offered his room for her to share. After some drinks, Randy confided to Sarzo things escalated to them kissing and more. Plus, he had a girlfriend back in LA, Jody Raskin, who would eventually become his fiancée. Randy also opened up to Rudy about a recent outreach from his father, William, after years without contact. Randy, who was very close to his mom, could not help but notice the timing of his estranged father's return, coinciding with the success of Ozzy's album. William had suggested they meet up when the tour came through New England, but Randy felt uneasy about the reunion. He told Sarzo that it was going to be tough after so much time. In August, during a concert in Providence, Rhode Island, he finally agreed to a backstage meeting. The encounter wasn't as awkward as he had anticipated, yet it was the last time he would ever see his dad. During a break in the tour that summer, Randy spent time at his family home, entertaining his mom, Kelly, and Kathy with tales of the last 9 months on the road with Ozzy. He reconnected with Jody, who he stayed in touch with through frequent postcards. Another pastime was his model train set. Growing up, Randy often traveled by train, as Dee preferred it to flying. The first time Randy flew was when he headed to the UK to meet with Ozzy. Those childhood train rides, spent staring out the window and daydreaming, were now nostalgically echoed in his adult passion for crafting an intricate model railway. He had set up tracks in his room, creating miniature villages he would diligently work on during his time at home. Kelly recalled, Randy's drinks were a bit whimsical, like they would come with a tiny umbrella, just a touch of alcohol and heaps of sugar. He'd mix his sweet drink, light up a cigarette, and play classical music while working on his little train set. While back on the road, the strain of touring began to show. During a European leg of the tour in the fall, while in Germany, Randy found joy in discovering the tiniest model trains he had ever seen. However, it was also in Europe that Ozzy began to unravel. Ozzy's secret relationship with Sharon Arden turned serious, unbeknown to his wife Thelma, and the relentless tour bus life was taking its toll. Night after night, Ozzy would protest that he was in pain or that his voice was failing, but Sharon, knowing full well his deep-seated fear of performing, would coax or even physically nudge him onto that stage. Eventually, following a particularly wild spree of heavy drinking and drug use, the band's European dates were called off, and they retreated to London until their second UK tour kicked off in November. The pressure did not let up as they geared for the next US tour in January of 1982. With both Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman achieving platinum status in the US, Ozzy was set to perform in much larger arenas. Sharon had designed a brand new stage show complete with a castle facade, also towers and walkways and medieval costumes for the band, as well as a dwarf named Ronnie, a nod to Ozzy's successor in Black Sabbath, Ronnie James Dio. The band members, however, were not digging this new stage design. Tommy Aldridge found his drum kit perched so high among the castle towers that he struggled to hear the rest of the group, while Randy and Rudy's amplifiers were tucked so far behind the castle walls that they also had their own sound issues. The most problematic aspect was the giant mechanical hand that Ozzy was expected to stand on for the encores, raising him high up above the audience. Ozzy, completely exasperated with the contraption, shouted at Sharon, "If it's so bloody safe, you try it," before walking away in frustration. Randy truly despised the nonsense of Ozzy's and Sharon's loud arguments, the throwing of objects and all the tension that created. As 1982 began, Randy was acclaimed as the best new guitar player in the US by Guitar Player magazine and the best guitarist in the UK by Sounds magazine, but he wasn't doing well personally. Rudy remembers Randy sharing his feelings of being out of sorts. Randy had confided in him saying, "I don't feel like myself anymore." He talked about how being in LA had just become so uncomfortable because everybody all of a sudden just wanted to be his friend. He recounted a night when he and Ozzy in a drunken state threw furniture out of a hotel room window, where he just said, "That is not me. That's not why I started playing the guitar in the first place." On January 20th, 1982, Ozzy bit the head off of a bat during a show in Des Moines, thinking it was fake until it started to flap in his mouth. Randy was not amused by this episode either. Tensions grew when Ozzy began to grumble about Randy's constant practice sessions on his classical guitar. The two stars were irritating each other. Randy started to distance himself from Ozzy, seeking out local classical musical instructors in every city they visited. However, the real breaking point for Randy was the plan to record a live album of nothing but Black Sabbath covers. This was a directive that supposedly came from Jet Records. Sharon, however, claimed that it was a strategy to free Ozzy from Jet and her father's influence. Regardless of the real reason, this decision created a significant rift between Randy and Ozzy. Randy tried to convince the band to refuse the project. In response, an infuriated Ozzy fired the entire band, though Sharon managed to defuse the situation. Ozzy even taunted Randy by saying that Frank Zappa and Gary Moore would replace him on the album if he refused to participate. Randy and Ozzy weren't just fighting about music. In February 1982, when Ozzy was arrested for urinating on the Alamo in San Antonio, Randy was completely shocked. He couldn't imagine the likes of Mick Ronson, David Bowie's guitar player, having to deal with such antics. Ozzy's latest escapade grabbed headlines worldwide, boosting ticket sales for his US tour and increasing the popularity of both of the albums. The following day, Randy made an announcement. He agreed to participate in the live Sabbath covers album and would even stick around for one more studio record with Ozzy if necessary, but after that he was done. He refused to put himself through the degradation and hardship of touring with Ozzy again. His plan was to return to school to immerse himself in classical music studies. Ozzy, hungover from the previous night's indulgences, reacted violently to Randy's news and punched him in the face. Drummer Tommy Aldridge and keyboardist Don Airey witnessed the confrontation. They said that upon learning of Randy's decision to leave, Ozzy struck him with an unexpected blow and berated him, calling him an ungrateful little shit. According to Tommy, it was a total cheap shot and Randy didn't even see it coming and wasn't prepared. After the altercation, the tension on the tour bus was palpable, with Ozzy and Randy no longer speaking to each other. Rudy remembers a time during a break in LA when a high-demand and really drunk Ozzy instructed him to warn Randy about the mistake he was making, claiming that he was ruining the best opportunity that he had. As time passed, Ozzy came to terms with Randy's decision. Reflecting on it years later, Ozzy admitted that he doubted Randy would have stayed in rock music. Ozzy had recalled telling Randy at the time, "Are you crazy? With a few more albums, you could start your own university." Randy had asked his mom to inquire about him pursuing a master's degree in classical music at UCLA. He had also been speaking with John Styx, the editor of Guitar World at the time, who was ready to introduce Randy to New York musicians such as Steve Gadd, Jean-Luc Ponty, and Earl Klugh. The resumed U.S. tour kicked off with the first two concerts at the Omni Arena in Atlanta on March 17th and at the Civic Coliseum in Knoxville the next evening. After the Knoxville show, during the 665-mile trip to the next gig in Orlando, Florida, the band settled at the back of the bus to watch the World War II film Midway. Their tour bus driver was 36-year-old Andrew Aycock. Despite Sharon's objections, he had brought along his estranged wife to accompany him on the drive to Orlando. The next morning, they stopped at the Red Baron Estates near Leesburg. Aycock, who boasted about being a pilot, had teased the band with the prospect of a little joyride in one of the small prop planes at the depot. He made good on his offer, taking Don Airey and tour manager Jake Duncan for a quick flight, buzzing over the tour bus before landing again. And then Aycock invited Randy and the band's 50-year-old seamstress Rachel Youngblood for a flight. Both were hesitant. Randy was known for his fear of flying, and Rachel had a heart condition, but Aycock assured them that it would be a simple up-and-down flight. Rudy Sarzo remembers this promise, which ultimately convinced Randy and Rachel to go along with the flight. Randy, who had taken up the habit of carrying the camera with him everywhere, grabbed his camera case and popped his head into Sarzo's bunk to see if he wanted to join. However, the bassist, still groggy and half asleep, was not interested. During the flight, Aycock, who is known for risky flying and showing off, tried to buzz the parked tour bus by flying the plane very close to it and near the ground. On their fourth attempt, the aircraft's wing hit the bus, which caused the plane to lose control. The plane then clipped the top of a pine tree and pinwheeled rapidly upside down, crashing into Jerry Calhoun's garage on the west side of the house, immediately exploding and engulfing the house and the garage. The crash killed all three people on board instantly, with Rhoads being identified only by his jewelry. 70-year-old Jesse Herndon inside the house at the time managed to escape without harm. The events that unfolded after the aircraft took off had led to extensive and ongoing debates. For some reason, the plane made a sudden descent and appeared to be on a collision course with the tour bus. Keyboardist Don Airey, who was photographing the aircraft with a telephoto lens, noticed figures inside the plane struggling. Wanda, Aycock's estranged wife, was on the bus's threshold. Some witnesses believe that Aycock had driven through the night and was reportedly arguing with her, and that he might have been attempting to crash the plane into the bus in order to kill her. Rudy Sarzo later surmised that Randy's actions on board might have averted Aycock from hitting the bus directly. But there were also whispers that Rachel Youngblood, who was in the front of the plane with dual controls, might have suffered a heart attack, causing her to slump over the controls and send the plane into a nosedive. The struggle that Don Airey saw could have been Randy seated behind her, trying to pull her away from the controls while Aycock fought to correct the plane's sudden drop. Rudy Sarzo remembers leaping from his bunk and witnessing the manager Jake Duncan on his knees weeping and repeating, "They're gone, they're gone." At the very same time, Sharon was yelling at him, accusingly asking him, "How could you let that baby get on a plane?" During the journey from Knoxville, it was apparent that Andrew Aycock and his wife were going through some serious marital issues. The atmosphere was charged with their tension, which seemed to have escalated throughout the night. Aycock had struggled with substance abuse in the past and was said to have used cocaine the night before the incident. In the aftermath of the crash, a bag of cocaine, which was owned by Aycock, was located and then secretly discarded in the forest close to the site of the accident. This find points to the pilot's drug use and the band's subsequent attempts to sidestep any legal issues. Back in LA, under a dreary sky, Randy Rhoads was laid to rest. Dolores Rhoads found Ozzy Osbourne weeping on her shoulder throughout the service. Rudy Sarzo was there to comfort Randy's fiancée, Jody Raskin. Ozzy, Rudy, Tommy Aldridge, and Kevin Dubrow served as pallbearers, along with Randy's longtime friends Frank Santa Cruz and Kim McNair. Randy's brother, Kelly, also declined the role of pallbearer, totally paralyzed in disbelief. Dolores Rhoads, despite her profound loss, made a point of personally thanking everybody who came, offering comfort indiscriminately. Yet beneath her warm exterior, it was obvious that she was just completely devastated. Despite the deep impact of Randy's passing, Ozzy thought it was the end. He returned to touring within 2 weeks, bringing in Bernie Torme, former guitarist for Gillan, to fill the void by Randy's absence. Randy's untimely departure from the world at the young age of 25 left the music community reeling, but his spirit and his innovations on the guitar have immortalized him. He wasn't just a musician, he was an artist who painted with notes and inspired countless others to pick up a guitar and follow in his footsteps. Though he's no longer with us, Randy Rhoads will always be remembered as a legend who changed the face of rock music forever. So if you like what you see here, kindly smack that like button, and while you're at it, hit subscribe and join the family. Thank you so much for watching.